Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first library lunch hour. I'm your host, Kimberly Roa. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator at Centro. We're so excited to have you here today, and we hope you're ready to nerd out with us as Centro's Library and Archive member, Aníbal Arocho, gives us a brief overview of our archives, an introduction to the process of archiving, and how to start your own archival collection. Additionally, we'd like to hear from you on what you'd like our Library and Archives division to talk about in upcoming lunch hours. So we'll be dropping a link in the chat to fill out a quick form where you can tell us what you want to see. Additionally, we will also be dropping a quick link in the chat where you can indicate as a researcher if you'd like to visit the Library and Archives and what collections you would like to do research on. You will also be able to ask questions during the or after Anibal finishes speaking and really get to know the Library and Archives and hopefully come back to future events. Now, without further ado, here is the wonderful Anibal.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and for providing the Centro an opportunity to speak about something that's very near and dear to us, our Library and Archives. Today is just the beginning of a very long conversation I hope to have with all of us, with all of our patrons, with all of our patrons to be, about just a general overview of what we have at our Library and Archives and some of the general concepts that go into archiving and starting an archive. This is not meant to be comprehensive in any way, shape, or form, but it's a way for us to begin a conversation and to continue a conversation in the future. I really do hope to see many of you at our Library and Archives over on 119th Street and 3rd Avenue, or I'd like to see your emails in my email inbox asking for more information about our collections. So I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. And then we can discuss. Okay, so too far back. All right, so I always like to start this presentation with a little bit of a reflection on the Center for Puerto Rican Studies and just how we got to be where we are as a library and archive. So this is a quote from the Committee for Puerto Rican Studies, 1972. And for those of you that know, Centro began in 1973. So this was a precursor body to the creation of Centro that was integral in the formation of everything that has gone on to be Centro. So the quote goes, "Questions continue to be raised as to whether there is enough about ourselves that merits scholarly study and whether any of us have any genuine understanding of what constitutes scholarship. We must continue to seek a place within the university from which to articulate the social and intellectual problems of our community while reaffirming the intent to define and control our own intellectual agenda." So on the list of priorities enumerated in the proposal for Centro was library and materials of development. So from the very beginning, organizing a repository and providing library resources in the Puerto Rican studies was an original and principal goal of Centro's founders. It is from the work of the Oral History Committee that the first donations come to us in the form of an archive to complement the library holdings, with the earliest collections being the Jesus Colón papers and the Justo Martí papers. What had originally started as a support unit, albeit a vital one for Centro staff and Puerto Rican Studies departments, has grown into a major repository for Puerto Rican diasporic history. So what is an archive? There's lots of different concepts about what an archive is. An archive exists as specific records. These are the permanent valuable records of people, organizations, and government. An archives exist as a space, which is the actual building where you keep your records. And an archives exists as an entity. an organization that dedicates itself to preserving these materials. But more than anything, I want to say that they're tools that allow people to communicate information and evidence through time. We have a commitment to identify, to preserve, and make materials available. And what that value is can be historical, literary, artistic, legal, or administrative. At Centro, we think that one key pillar to having an archive is providing service to patrons. And who that patron is varies. For Centro, it's all sorts of people. It's high school kids, it's parents, it's PhD scholars. But who your archive is dedicated to, or who your patrons are, can change. For instance, if you have an organization, it can be for your own internal history to share with your staff members. So what are the types of things that are preserved in an archive? This letter here is pretty interesting, and it's a letter from the City University of New York that goes a little something like this. Thanks to the Ford Foundation's help, CUNY has finally been able to get its Center for Puerto Rican Studies off the ground. As you know, a prominent Latin American scholar, Professor Frank Bonilla, has been appointed as a full professor with tenure to be director of the center. So this is the type of foundational document that we have in our archive. And this is the type of foundational document that if you have an organization, it might be interesting to save for your organization. So what is the types of things that are preserved? It's the administrative, legal, and fiscal records of an organization. It could be memoranda, minutes from meetings. It can be photographs. It can be notebooks, ledgers, or diaries. It's important to note that not all this stuff has to be old. I know we tend to think of archives as, we like to think of old newspaper clippings and dusty piles of papers, but that's definitely not the case, as more and more often we find ourselves archiving digital materials. And digital material can be captured directly from a computer. Part of the process of archiving digital material is figuring out the organization of file names, file storage, and how to transfer that material safely to a new repository. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit of the materials that Centro has in its archive, some of the collections. So obviously one of the primary reasons that we have our archive is to provide historical documentation of Puerto Ricans in the United States. You can see a collection of images of historical relevance from various sources, how Puerto Rico has been integral to the history of the 20th century. One of the precipitating factors for the creation of our archive was oral histories. The inception of the archive started with these projects. Through the research and connections made with individuals, they planted a seed for what would become our archive. And the archive has had three distinct phases. It's grown and developed over the years, with Centro adding new collections. So you can see that it's definitely not static. So we started as the Puerto Rican Archives of New York, because the majority of our material related to Puerto Rican diasporic migration to New York. Then we became the Archives of the Puerto Rican Migration, as we started to document Puerto Rican migration all over the United States. And now we're the Archives of the Puerto Rican Diaspora, documenting all Puerto Ricans stateside. And this is just an example of some of the different materials that are located in the archives. As you can see, travel to New York has changed quite a bit. These are beach chairs that are inside of a military plane. And this was through the advent of air travel, this was the first arrival of Puerto Ricans were under these conditions. You can see identification cards from US Customs Service. This is from our Jesus Colon collection. We have the personal papers of individuals, the collections that we receive from individuals are referred to the papers of, and they can range from elected officials to community leaders, artists, authors, educators, and most importantly, normal everyday citizens. Just because it's a high profile individual doesn't necessarily mean it has any more value than just the papers of a normal everyday citizen who engaged in their daily life. We have the papers of organizational records. These are collections from organizations, and they're usually referred to as the records of, for instance, the records of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And they can range from small community organizations to large national organizations and everything in between. And this is integral to the study of how policies are created and implemented and identifying the crises of our time and how the Puerto Rican community has banded together to overcome. So, like I mentioned, small community organizations like the United Bronx Parents, started by Evelina Lopez Antonetti, to national organizations. One of the largest collections that we have and is called OGPress, the Office of the Government of Puerto Rico in the United States. It was a government organization that supported the needs of a growing Puerto Rican population in the United States. The Puerto Rican government entrusted this to Centro, and the Centro provides the arrangement and description and access to this collection. This includes ID cards that were issued to Puerto Ricans who arrived in the United States. These ID cards were, in many cases, the only identification that people would have in order to do things like have a bank account, rent an apartment. And we have the papers of the records of their 16 local and regional offices. We also have the records of Puerto Ricans outside of the traditional population centers. So people like to think that the Northeast was one of the primary areas where the first Puerto Ricans arrived, when in actuality, the West, California, specifically San Francisco and Hawaii, were some of the earliest Puerto Rican communities. And we have some really lovely collections of Puerto Ricans in Hawaii. We have depictions of family life, primarily from the Justo Marti collection. Justo Marti was a Cuban photographer who documented life in Puerto Rican communities. We can see how people celebrated their milestones, marriages, major events, how they passed time, their hobbies. And it's key to understand how our culture is transferred from Puerto Rico to different communities stateside. We have over 2,000 art and political posters, drawing, and other materials, including government posters created by the DEVEDCO, División de Educación a la Comunidad, book covers, prints, and paintings. We have collections that represent politics, government, and law, and that really show how different political parties were all vying for the votes of the Puerto Rican community. We have election material, buttons, posters, and other ephemera, and also material from activist organizations that were key to pressuring political figures to act and to actually help their constituents. We have the collections of prominent women, such as Antonia Pantoja, who founded Aspira, Helen Rodriguez Trias, who was a doctor and community leader, and Pura Belpré, who was the first Puerto Rican librarian in the New York Public Library system. We have her manuscripts. We have those puppets that she's holding there. We have them in our collection. And we have all the correspondence that came with her as a pioneer who came and really changed the way that children's literature, especially children's literature in Spanish, was given to children in the New York Public Library system. We have Evelina Lopez Antonetti, who founded United Bronx Parents, and who was called by many the Hell Lady of the Bronx, because she liked to raise a lot of hell for the people in her community. And Olga Mendez was the first Puerto Rican woman elected to a state legislature. We have collections that represent LGBTQ communities. Homovisiones is a program that is currently being digitized through a collaborative grant with CUNY TV. It provided entertainment and informational programming to the Puerto Rican LGBTQ community through public access television. And we hope to make this available free and openly available to the public in the near future as soon as the digitization of these video cassettes is completed. We have literary collections, and these are really a lot of our more popular collections. We have the notebooks and artifacts of Pedro Pietri. We have manuscripts of Tato Laviera and Miguel Algarín, unpublished plays of Victor Fragoso, and a host of other important figures in the literary community. We have depictions of protests and activism. And if you see, a lot of the issues that people were struggling against have not changed. People still need health rights, they still need educational rights, and they're still struggling against the brutality of the police. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a protest against the depiction of Puerto Ricans in the movie Fort Apache. And another prime example of activist collections is Richie Perez. It's an incredibly rich collection. So now that you have an idea of the different types of materials that we have at Centro, I want to share a little bit of my thoughts about what you might want to consider when starting an archive. You need to identify resources. What is out there? These are the people you want to collect from, organizations you want to collect from. It could be your own organization. Maybe your organization needs to get its records together to create its own archive. What you need to do is figure out a survey or some way of conducting questionnaires and interviews directed at communities that you're interested in engaging with, and that will help determine the types of materials that are out there and who you should be engaging with. You want to identify the types of material that you're going to collect. Are you going to be a digital archive? Are you going to be collecting paper documents? Are you going to be a photographic archive? Are you going to be collecting moving images and film? Or are you strictly going to collect digital records? All of these different types of material have different challenges inherent to collecting them. Are you going to collect manuscripts, artifacts and awards, artwork? Do you have someone dedicated to collecting the assorted ephemera that would otherwise be thrown away by your organization? These are the types of things that you give away at events. These are the types of agendas that you collect at meetings. Have you been able to identify a space where the material is going to be stored? Have you been able to identify professionals who are going to be able to support your work? These are the archivists and historians who can provide interpretation, organization, and in digitization in many cases. And very importantly, have you identified funding streams to continue to operate your archive? That's really important in terms of the materials, the space, and the personnel. All of that can add up very quickly. So have you reached out to different organizations, private foundations such as the Ford Foundation or the National Endowment for the Humanities? You need to be able to prepare yourself. So you need to prepare the personnel. These are the people that are going to be processing and arranging your collections. You're going to have to prepare a space. You need a very clean, well-ventilated and climate-controlled space with a stable temperature no higher than 70 degrees Fahrenheit and a relative humidity between a minimum of 30% and a maximum of 50%. This is very difficult in areas, especially where the usual temperature is a tropical climate. And it's one of the crises that we see when we work with archives in Puerto Rico, is that the humidity is very detrimental to the materials. Do you have enough supplies, boxes, folders, clips, and sleeves? All of these should be acid-free to prevent further deterioration of materials. And again, all of acid-free archival quality materials tend to be very expensive. So do you have a funding stream to be able to cover the cost of all of these materials? Once you have archival material, are you prepared to organize it? A lot of times, the original order that we receive materials can be very helpful in telling the story and providing context to a collection. Materials should be kept in a clean, cool, temperature-stable environment, and digital materials should be backed up regularly to redundant sources. You want to make sure that before you have conversations with archival staff before getting rid of anything or reorganizing anything. Because unnecessary weeding or reorganization can affect the research value of materials significantly. And I always like to say that original material is better than copies. So if you're going to be receiving donations, it's better to have the original document rather than photocopies of document that might not be legible. You need to consider the rights of the materials in your collection, and this would come with a deed of gift. A deed of gift is a formal legal agreement between a donor and a repository that transfers ownership and legal rights of the donated materials. Ultimately, a legal agreement is in the best interest of both the donor and the repository, and it establishes and governs a legal relationship regarding the materials. You have to make sure that you're prepared to arrange and describe materials. When you arrange materials, you're reviewing records to see who or what created them, how and why they were created, what functions they document, and what their physical nature is. When you describe materials, it's a process of explaining that arrangement so that people know where to look and find the answers to these questions. And you might hear the word finding aid a lot when it comes to archival repositories. A finding aid is just another tool that helps a user find information in a specific record group, collection, or series of archival materials. They can be published and unpublished inventories, container and folder lists, indexes, and instructional guides. Finally, you want to know how to disseminate the material that you have. What will your organization do to make sure that your patrons know that your collection exists and understand the access and use policies of your collection? And here is my contact information. Most importantly, so please make sure you take down my email address, and any clarification you need about what we've heard today, you can reach out to me. And I hope to see you, many of you come visit us in our building on 119th Street and 3rd Avenue. And I'm here for the Q&A, so we have some time.
Thank you, Anibal, for that lovely presentation. It was wonderful to learn about archiving and what we can start doing ourselves to archive our lives and what we want to collect. We have a question from Chronicling Resistance Fellows. Suppose you can only afford one thing out of the needs that you suggested. What would you prioritize?
Oh, wow. I would say personnel. People should be at the core of creating an archive. Definitely people with knowledge of what they're doing in terms of arranging and describing. You can always apply for grants later or do community funding to get those archival quality boxes and things for the long-term preservation. But if you don't have the individuals on hand in order to actually arrange and describe a collection and then create a dissemination plan for how you share that collection with other people, it doesn't matter what the condition of the box is.
Wonderful. Blanca Vasquez also wants to know, is the library planning public programs based on the archived material?
Absolutely, yeah. Kimberly and I are working diligently to come up with a whole bunch of programming that's going to be discussing different collections that we have in the library and archive, and also different ways that people can interact with our content, even from home.
Beth would like to know, do you do interlibrary loans or out-of-state loans?
Yes, yes. We for library materials, we do provide interlibrary loans. That would be anything that's a book. We have an extensive video collection and an extensive collection of microfilm, newspapers, and other periodicals. So absolutely, you just need to contact me in the email below, and we can arrange an interlibrary loan. Currently, I am working at the library, so I have access to all of our material. It's searchable in the Hunter College library catalog. You just need to filter it. When you do a search, you need to filter it for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and you can see all the material available. For material from the archive, we provide reproductions. So there's a reproduction services link on our website where you can request materials.
A New York archivist would like to know, what are the most research collections at Centro?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I would say the Pura Verpre collection is really extensively used to the point where the actual physical collection is starting to suffer a little bit of deterioration just from handling. So that collection has actually been microfilmed in its entirety. And so people can view the microfilm. And increasingly, that collection is being put online in our digital repository.
Amazing. Melissa would like to know, what sort of books, websites, or other resources do you recommend for a new archivist?
Definitely the Society for American Archivists website. It's where you can get free access to PDFs with information about how to create a deed of gift. It's a really good resource for discussing how to process donations and how to solicit donations from potential donors. And it has all of the published archival description standards known as DACS. It's a content standard, which is a set of rules for describing archives, personal papers, and manuscripts collections, which is freely available, and it's universally recognized as a standard for all archival repositories.
Nicole would like to know if the center offers more training on archiving, and do you have any sources for community archiving funds to share? Does the Centro have the capacity to offer seed funding for other Puerto Rican archivists? And can we create an archiving collection to bring all of us together that want to archive their individual communities across the US? It's a very big question.
I mean, that's an excellent question. I think it's one of the things that we actually look for outside funding for, is to help to create community archives. I know there are several grants, several large grants that are created specifically for this type of community archiving. And Centro always likes to position itself as a knowledge base, so that if you come across a grant that you think would be great for your organization or a different group of organizations, we can come together and help to assist you in a support capacity.
Teresa would like to know, with technology changing so quickly, what is the best way to preserve materials digitally?
I would say there are definitely standards that are prescribed by the Society of American Archivists. The difficulty with digital content is that it's not as easy as just copying and pasting a document from one directory to the next. There's a lot of invisible metadata associated with digital files that changes every time you move it from one drive to the next. So in order to actually keep the original file, you need to go through a process and run that file through software to preserve the original version of the file. So I would say you can always look for the best practices at the Society of American Archivists. And they have subcommittees specifically for digital archiving.
Wonderful. Somebody would like to know, what are some of the primary short and long-term goals and plans for Centro Library and our collections?
The short-term plan is to really get back up to speed to where we were pre-pandemic. We want to get more researchers into our reading room. We want to make sure that our collection stays up to date with all the most recent publications relating to Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rico. And in long-term plans, we want to continue to seek external funding from government organizations so that we can digitize as much material as we can and make it available to people all over the world.
Yes, and that being said, I just dropped a link in the chat. If you are a researcher who would like to visit Centro's Library and Archives, please fill out this form so we can get the conversation started and get you guys visiting the Library and Archives. Melissa would like to know if you would mind saying a little bit more about what you wrote on an earlier slide about archives being more interested in a coherent body of materials rather than individual materials.
Sure. What we're trying to do with any archival collection is you're trying to recreate essentially the life of an individual based on the documents and other evidence that they've left behind. So having a bulk of material provides more content rather than receiving one or two pieces of material at a time that don't really have any context with any other documents. If you receive a large bulk of items, you understand its place within other items, its place chronologically, and its place thematically.
Wonderful. Ruth would like to know, do you have collaborations with other investigators and/or provide consultations to expand archives? And for example, she said that, they said that they would like to develop a plan to add Puerto Rican socio-medical and public health researchers who are pioneers in research on systemic racism in community.
We certainly collaborate with people, with other archivists, with scholars, and we've pledged support within grants to other organizations that are doing archival work. It's always something that we entertain and that we're willing to have conversations about. Just reach out to us via email.
Wonderful. Someone else would like to know, when you digitize and scan documents, how do you determine the best format to save them? And secondly, do you need to keep updating the files so the formats are readable over time as software changes?
That's a very good point. We adhere to whatever the base standards are for image digitization according to the Society of American Archivists. And we have a whole separate personnel dedicated to our digital collections. And I can get further information about that if you reach out to me.
And then one final question from Liz, who is curious about artists and collectives represented in the arts, prints, and drawings collections at the archives, like Taller Boricua. Is it primarily artworks, or are there documents, writing, ephemera associated with the artist and group in this collection or other collections that we have at the archives?
It's a phenomenal question. And one that I would ask that you reach out to me via email. I don't have that information directly in front of me at the moment, but I would like to share any of the collections that we have related to arts, and I can if you reach out to me via email, I can share that.
Somebody else would also like to know a little bit more about the staff at the library, and if aside from yourself, like who else they might be able to see if they do go visit.
The staffing right now, there is myself, the library manager. Then we have a digital projects coordinator who's responsible for maintaining the digital collections and to continuing the digitization for our National Endowment for the Humanities grant. And then we have an archivist who processes collections. So yeah, you can reach out to us and you can rely on any of us to help with any questions you may have.
Great. We also put a form in the chat. We would love to hear from everybody who attended, what you thought of this presentation. We appreciate the feedback, so we know what to include next time. And we also want to hear from you if you have any specific collections you would like us to exploring future library and library lunch hours. Oh, and actually somebody asked for a quick recap for students who just joined. I don't know if we'll have time for a quick summary, Anibal,
Sure.
for some students who joined late.
I'm down. Okay. I was once a late student myself. So the Center for Puerto Rican Studies has been around since 1973. Our archives has been around in some form since 1989. I went over a variety of different collections that we have that document different Puerto Rican communities, activists, community organizations, large and small, some of the topics that are represented, such as LGBTQ communities and migration. Then I've been discussing with the lovely people here how you can begin to start considering starting your own archive. So different things that you should identify, such as collections that you might want to be adding to your archive, whether they're from individuals or from organizations, identifying space where you're going to keep all this stuff, identifying supplies that you're going to need, identifying any needs that you're going to have in terms of dissemination, and identifying funding streams, and preparing space, and having the proper material in place and the proper personnel in place. And then I gave my email address, which is probably the most important part, is that so we could follow up these conversations later.
Awesome. If there will be no more questions, we want to thank you all for coming. We're definitely going to leave the chat open. You guys can continue talking. Anibal and I will hang out for a little bit longer, but we want to welcome you to come back to these events. The next one we are hosting will be on October 12th with Susan Klein, who is another member of the Library and Archives, and then we will have one on October 26th, same time at 12 p.m. And we'll provide you the Zoom links and the registration links as in the future, in the very near future. But we do want to continue having these events. We hope to see you again. We'll also be having a variety of other events featuring our data hubs, Puerto Rican authors, artists, and more. There's a lot more at Centro in addition to these library and archives. So we really hope to see you all back here. Anibal, any closing remarks?
Thank you, everyone. I am blown away by the interest this received. And I want everyone to know that Centro is always striving to provide material to people digitally. So we're going to be adding a lot more material digitally. So I'm going to enter our digital collection in the chat. So I want everybody to go check it out. Oh, I sent that to Kimberly. So Kimberly, if you can put that, if you can put that in the chat. It's our digital collection. That's where you can access at least some of the material that we have. Centro has over 300 collections, and it is a constant a stream of material that we're putting online. So please go view. You can search by keyword, you can search by decade, you can search by location. And if you're interested in everything from bilingual education to the young lords, you'll find something, including lots of really great oral histories. So please make sure that you are taking advantage of all of that. We want to make sure that the hard work that we're doing here at the Library and Archives every day is actually being put to good use. And it's really encouraging to me that we had such a great turnout today. And so thank you, and we hope to see you at the next library lunch hour. So please, we're going to be discussing the Charas collection, and it is fascinating. So please join us.